Just about 60 kilometers southeast of Paris, firefighters are battling a raging wildfire, which the Interior Minister says may have been intentionally set. The flames have scorched at least 1,000 hectares in the Fontainebleau forest, which is dotted with several small villages, and hundreds of people have been forced to evacuate. The fire also disrupted train traffic to and from the French capital today. The conditions for firefighters have been brutal, with most of the country still in the grips of an intense heat wave. Emerald Maxwell has the latest.
Philippe is keeping a close eye on how the fire is spreading in Fontainebleau forest, from afar, but also on his phone.
I've got cameras at home, one at the front and one at the back. They're usually not much use in terms of security, but at least now I can see if the house is still standing or if it had caught fire.
The local resident was woken in the middle of the night and ordered to evacuate.
The council went from house to house, honking their horns, calling out to people to see if anyone was there, and telling them, "You've got to leave." The worrying thing is the wind, because if it changes direction, we could get caught in the middle. It's far too dry, far too dry.
The Interior Minister said the fire, which by Monday afternoon had burned through nearly 1,000 hectares of the historic forest, may have been started deliberately. An assessment backed up by another local who witnessed a couple of fires break out seemingly simultaneously Sunday afternoon.
Of the two fires I saw, one was on the east side of the motorway, the other was on the west side of the motorway. And there was easily a kilometre between them, as well as the road. It's highly unlikely that in such a short space of time, a fire that hadn't really taken hold could have spread a kilometre. It's impossible.
Olivier was also one of the nearly 900 people evacuated Sunday. He and his wife had less than 15 minutes to pack the essentials for them and their dog.
It's unprecedented. It's the first time there have been fires on such an exceptional scale, and the first time there's been an evacuation.
More commonly seen in the south of France, firefighting aircraft were sent out to douse the flames for the first time ever in the Greater Paris region. Amid the third heat wave of the summer, authorities say an estimated 32,000 hectares of land have burned so far this year across the country, more than in the whole of 2025.
And for more on this story, I'm joined by Stefan Doerr, the director of the Center for Wildlife Research at Swansea University. Thanks so much for being with us here on France 24. Just to start off here, how unusual is it to see a fire of this scale and intensity burning so close to Paris?
It's very unusual outside of the Mediterranean to have such an extreme fire. What sets the fire apart here is that it's carried out, or it's burning in an area that has very sandy soils, they're very dry. So this area around Paris is probably more vulnerable than other areas that are not in the Mediterranean basin.
Well, officials are calling this fire exceptional. Is that because of the heat wave, or are there other factors like you're mentioning right there because of the landscape that make it exceptional?
Of course, the heat wave is the main factor here. We're now in the third heat wave. We had very dry conditions, but on top of all this, we have very strong winds, and some of the wind in the area has changed direction as well. That makes it extremely difficult to tackle this fire. But the heat, the low humidity, and the strong winds are the key factors. When we see catastrophic fires, whether that is in Europe or elsewhere, but people have to evacuate it, and sometimes people are unfortunately killed in fires, it's very often during strong winds.
Now, as we saw in that report, firefighting planes traveled from the south to fight this fire near Paris. Usually those planes are based in the south where it's typically hotter and drier. So what does that tell you about how prepared the Paris region is for a fire of this kind?
Well, obviously, we see the planes in action now, and Europe has invested into firefighting aircraft, especially for this fire season. But this is probably not sufficient because we don't see fires of that scale, as has been said many times now, in the Paris region or outside of the Mediterranean in general. So this is clearly a very unusual event where all the stops are being pulled out to tackle it. But whether that is sufficient is a different question.
Well, so what can regions that don't usually experience the threat of wildfires, such as the Paris region, what can they do to be better prepared?
I mean, ultimately, all the regions in Europe, especially those that have large forest areas like Fontainebleau, need to be better prepared, because we will get more heat waves, we will get more extreme heat waves, and if they're associated with strong winds, something needs to be done about this. But it's not just the fighting of the fires when they've occurred. We don't know yet whether this fire has been caused by arson or accident. It's unlikely it's caused by lightning, so the main cause will be by humans, and preventing that in the first place, if it was an accidental fire, be it a barbecue, be it an ignition from a failed power line, or anything else from machinery, these are the things we can certainly reduce. We can't prevent them 100%, but these are the things we need to be very, very careful about, because everything is so dry and so flammable.
You talk about how regions can be better prepared, but what about individuals? For people who live in or near bigger cities where wildfires don't usually pose a threat, what's some practical advice for protecting yourself from the threat of a wildfire?
Well, when it comes to individuals, I think we all need to live with the fact that fires will get worse also in areas that don't have traditionally fires. So we need to understand how fires start, so stop basically using potential ignition sources, but also we need to know about evacuation, for example. The tragic death we've seen in Spain last week, on an example here where evacuation led to the death of people. And this is not uncommon in severe wildfires, and we need to be aware of this. We should actually teach in schools what happens if there's a wildfire nearby. Also about the smoke. Smoke can be very dangerous. Ultimately, it leads to many premature deaths around the world, smoke from wildfires, and we need to be aware of that. We shouldn't inhale smoke from wildfires for long times. The other aspect is your home. How do you actually protect your home? And there are many things we can do in terms of protecting our homes. We shouldn't, for example, have excessive vegetation that is very flammable, such as conifers. So other trees, for example, deciduous trees, are much less flammable. Do I have dry grass in my area? Farmers, can they actually generate a perimeter around their field when the wheat is very dry and very flammable? If you have a break between that wheat field and the house, or perhaps a nearby forest, that alone can help firefighters a lot in stopping a fire. It sometimes might even stop the fire in its tracks. If the conditions are very windy, like they have been, it is, of course, particularly dangerous, because embers can be transported over long distances and can ignite the fire well ahead of the existing fire front. So it is very challenging, but we need to be more aware, and we need to prepare the environment more to basically reduce the risk of fire, but we'll never eliminate it completely.
You've talked a bit about the effect that this has on the soil and maybe nearby bodies of water. Fontainebleau is a former royal hunting forest. How long does it take for an area like that to recover from a wildfire like this?
Well, that really depends. Many fires around the world are called stand replacing fires, and they are normal, and the trees will recover from seeds. Now, some of the trees in the Fontainebleau forest, they are quite well adapted to fire, but only up to a point. So pines, for example, are adapted to fire, but if the fire is extreme, like it appears to be here, they are often killed. And then to recover, at least from a forest perspective, this can take 20, 30 years to have the forest look similar to what it is at the moment.
Let's just zoom out here and talk about the bigger picture. As we see hotter weather from climate change, should we expect to see more fires like this in places we normally wouldn't see them, like here near Paris?
There is absolutely no question that we will see more fires like this around the world, especially in the northern part of Europe, where they have been relatively uncommon. For example, the fire danger, the fire risk in relation to fire weather has increased around the world quite dramatically in the past due to climate change. And this is only the beginning. No matter what we do, and we do need to do everything we can to reduce further climate change, the fire risk will increase globally, and it's certainly moving north. We've even seen fires in Greenland. Now, they weren't particularly destructive, but this is something you would have not expected at all. Perhaps 10 or 15 years ago, we had extreme fires in northern Germany, much more common now than they were in the past. Fires in the UK, for example, at the moment we have extreme fires in the UK going on as well. So yes, we can certainly expect that. There's no question about it, and we need to be prepared.
I've heard it argued that we in the media always cover wildfires as purely destructive, but wildfires can actually serve as an environmental purpose. Of course, that's tough to talk about when people are being affected by these wildfires, but is there some truth to that argument?
Well, absolutely. There are many areas in the world where the forests or the grasslands rely on fire to recover. This is the eucalyptus forest in Australia, These are the boreal forest in Canada, in Siberia. These are many of the grasslands in African savannas, for example. So they live with fire. In Africa, for example, in the savannas, fires are normal every 2 to 3 years, and they maintain the open ecosystem. In Canada, in northern Canada, for example, you have normally a fire, say, every 100 to 120 years. The trees are killed, and they come back from seeds. That is normal. Some of the plants have seeds that will only fall to the ground if there's a fire. If you remove the fire from the landscape, those species will not survive. But that's not necessarily the case in most areas of Europe. But also what we have to consider that the vegetation we have in many parts of Europe is not one that is tuned to the natural environment and the natural, what we call fire regime. Most of Europe is heavily modified through thousands of years of modification. So many of the forests we see now have nothing to do with what they would have been in the past. But certainly there are many areas in Europe, especially in the Mediterranean, where fire is essentially normal. But the severe fires we are seeing now, they often go beyond the ecosystem in terms of how the ecosystem can cope with it. So it's not just whether or not we have a fire. It very much depends on how severe the fire is. Just coming back to the fires burning right now, those conifer trees, they are quite well adapted to fire, but only fire that travels slowly over the ground and doesn't actually burn into the canopy. As soon as it burns into the canopy, the tree will die. So it's a subtle difference between fires. It's not just having fires or not having fires.
We still don't know what caused this fire, but if it turns out that this fire was intentionally set, as the Interior Minister suggested, does that change how we should think about the risk in regions like this, which are historically low risk for wildfires?
Well, of course, we should do everything to reduce both arson and accident. But essentially, no matter where you go, if there are humans, there will always be ignition sources. So I think it's almost futile to discuss about whose fault it is, who set that fire. We should make sure that we can make the landscape less flammable, reduce the human ignitions as far as we can, and be very prepared to deal with fire when it occurs. We will not be able to remove ignitions in a landscape where there are humans.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Stefan Doerr, the director of the Center for Wildfire Research at Swansea University. Thanks so much for being with us here on France 24 tonight. We appreciate your perspective.